Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the MVMA Hot Topics webinar. Minnesota OSHA 2024-2028 Strategic Plan includes you, featuring Michelle Smith, Safety Consultant Principal from Minnesota OSHA Workplace Safety Consultation. For those of you who don't recognize my voice, which I know many of you do, I'm Nicole Cast. I am the Director of Professional Development with the MVMA, and I'm happy that you have joined us here tonight. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Michelle Smith, who has worked in the safety and health field for over 20 years. She began her safety career working as a wood door manufacturer in Northeast Wisconsin, and then moved back to Minnesota to work for a quartz countertop manufacturing before joining Minnesota OSHA's Workplace Safety Consultation team as a safety consult principal. Michelle works with all types of employers and helps them improve safety and health culture and provide a safer working environment for their employees. Michelle, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all listening in today, and I hope that you will learn something from our presentation. I think we will probably have them put the questions in the chat. Is that right, Nicole?
If they could put them in the Q&A or chat,
Okay.
we'll figure it out. I've got them both open to look at them.
Okay, great. I do have some stopping points in the presentation, kind of after each section. So when we get through one section, we will stop, ask some questions, and then we'll take questions at the end. So next slide. So I work for Minnesota OSHA. I know that's a name that you guys are all probably familiar with. Here in Minnesota, we are one of 29 states that operate as a state-run OSHA. That means we must be at least as stringent as federal OSHA and have all their regulations in place. But Minnesota has some additional rules and regulations. And if you look at that book on the right, that yellow one, that is the OSHA laws and rules for the state of Minnesota. And you can look under compliance, and they will also have those available online. This last legislative session, there were a bunch of updates to the book. You may have heard there was a new ergonomic standard for warehouses and meat packing and healthcare. But there were also some penalty increases that were monetary. And so don't get too excited when you see these numbers. Most of you will never see these numbers, but they did increase the penalty on the top end for a serious hazard from $7,000 to $15,625. And the reason that jump was so much is that Minnesota has been putting off increasing that penalty number for a number of years. And finally, federal OSHA said, hey, listen, you're supposed to be as stringent as we are, and you have this fine of $7,000 and ours is over 15. You're going to need to do something about it. So last year was the year they bit the bullet and they upped that penalty amount on the top end, almost doubled it. Next slide. So the reason I'm talking to you tonight is Minnesota OSHA has what they call a strategic management plan. They release one every 5 years. This one is for 2024 through 2028. And it really is a guide for what Minnesota OSHA is going to be doing in the activities they're going to be having. They talk about what types of industries will be emphasized in compliance visits. And so that's where veterinary services comes in. Next slide. So I want to look at how we got here. It seems like it was a big jump that all of a sudden there were no eyes on veterinary services, and now we have them on the emphasis list. And so I did some checking of different areas, and one of them was I went to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics websites, and I looked at the top 10 for the last 5 years, starting in 2022. That's the latest data that is out there. And we looked at accident rates. That's how they rank those top 10. And you can see that in the last 5 years that are on record, that veterinary services has had a relatively very high accident rate. And they've been anywhere from number 8 to number 1. So that is kind of what brought them into the emphasis program and why they were identified as somebody that should be added. And then the NAICS code for that is 541940. That's veterinary services. Okay, next slide. Then you could also figure out what types of injuries are in veterinary services. And these are the types of injuries that resulted in days away from work for employees or even restricted activities at work. And this was just for 1 year. And these are national numbers, just so you know, they're not just the state of Minnesota. And so we ended up with 23,130 injuries that were on the books. And some of them get unreported, but this, for the most part, is the most accurate number we have. And I have them all listed there. There are 7 different ones. And the top one is right in the middle. That one is wounds, 10,540. And that probably is because of bites. Then we look on top, we have strains and tears. There was over 3,000. Over 1,000 fractures, 910 lacerations, 650 contusions, and then just general soreness and pain is 1,790. Anything that didn't fall under that was 4,840. So that just kind of gives you an idea, or gives OSHA an idea of what kind of injuries are happening in those vet offices or veterinary hospitals. Next. And this is actually a page out of the strategic management plan. And you can see all the different industries on the left side, inspection emphasis. A lot of those are on there all the time, like manufacturing, food manufacturing, wood product manufacturing. Those are pretty steady on the list all the time. But if we go down, you can see veterinary services. Also added to the list was amusement parks, ski hills, hotels, motels. And so they're not just picking on you. We've added a few new ones for this year. Next slide. So what the emphasis program does is it puts you in line for a programmed inspection from Minnesota OSHA, and 65% of their programmed inspections are going to come from that list. And when we talk about a programmed inspection, that's exactly what it is. You're on this list that they've generated. We're not sure what magic they use to generate that list, but a lot of times it's just being in the industry. It also can do with accident or injury rates within your practice. It can also be work comp information if they have any of that. So those are the things that put you on their list for a program inspection. There are also other different types of Minnesota OSHA inspections. Imminent danger is the top priority. That's if they see somebody up on top of a building, not tied off, could fall 20, 30, 40 feet. Fatalities, catastrophic events, those are second priority. Complaints are third, and programmed are fourth. Follow-up is the last one. Those are usually done if someone isn't abating their hazards that were identified by OSHA. But program visits are far and away the most visits that they do. Next slide. So when they come on site, they're going to look at different types of hazards. Imminent danger is the most serious of the hazards. Again, somebody up on a building going to fall 20 or 30 feet. A serious hazard is something that could cause serious injury. Open electrical, machine guarding if we're in a manufacturing plant, cords that have wires showing. Those are those are all considered serious hazards. They have a higher dollar amount associated to them than other than serious hazards. Other than serious hazards are hazards that are probably not going to cause an injury at this time, but they could work their way to being that. Some of the electrical, if an insulation on a cord is just partially damaged, but there's no wire showing, that's an other than serious. And then record keeping, usually they don't write citations for record keeping unless you don't have an OSHA 300 log at all and are required to have one. Then they may write you a record keeping hazard citation, but I don't think they do that all the time. Next. So we're going to look at compliance activity in veterinary services, and this is just in Minnesota now. When we look at 3 years prior to this fiscal year, we see that there were only one visit each in 3 years, 2019, 21, and 23. The fiscal year actually starts October 1st, so that's of 2023. So that's when veterinary services would have been added. Those 3 prior visits were all complaint visits, and veterinary services was not receiving any program visits at all. But then when we look at starting October 1st, the last date I could find on the computer that was entered already was March 12th. There was 29 program visits, and then there was 1 referral visit. And so what happened for a referral visit is that all 29 of those program visits were safety visits, but then the safety inspector found something they thought maybe an industrial hygienist should look at for a health visit. So one of those was a referral. Next slide. When we look at the citations, though, remember we have 30 different visits in this fiscal year. But when we look at citations from 2019 to 2024, I'm sorry, we don't have a whole lot of them. So you guys have done pretty good by being ready, I think, for Minnesota OSHA. You might not quite be there yet, but the number 1 citation written was for a hazard communications employee right to know program, to have a written program for hazardous chemicals. And it could also be that you weren't doing the annual training. So there's a couple things that fall under hazard communications, but there were only 5 citations out of those. Actually, total there were 33 visits for those 5 years. Then emergency exits, there were four citations written, and with those, either an exit wasn't properly marked or it was blocked. That usually calls for a citation for emergency exits. Personal protective equipment, that could have fallen under a reason somebody wasn't wearing the proper PPE. Sometimes if people are cleaning with bleach, that's corrosive, and so they need different types of PPE, splash goggles, gloves, anything corrosive, you need to make sure you have the proper personal protective equipment. Same with the emergency eye wash. Anything that is corrosive, you either need to have emergency eye wash that's hard plumbed, or you can have the big green eye washes that are attached to the wall. I know you're going to laugh at the next one because it says failure to have fall protection. There was 1 citation written for that, but that's just not being 20 feet up in the air and not wearing a harness. That is probably from having steps that employees have to go up and down that don't have proper railing in place, I'm guessing. It doesn't give me all those specifics when I run the report. General electrical requirements could have been an open electrical box, knockout missing from an electrical box, and there was only 1 of those. Safety committee requirements, there's only 1 of those. And that was because they had more than 25 people and they did not have a safety committee. And you notice that number looks a little bit different, 182.676. That's because that is a Minnesota statute. So that's a requirement for people in Minnesota. And then on the bottom here is annual training, employee right to know, and that is with hazard communications. So those two, that is a Minnesota rule, but they just have some extra rules for hazard communications. And one of them is the annual training. If you're a federal state, you don't have to do the annual training, but in Minnesota you do. So actually the last one and the top one are pretty much related to each other. Next slide. So here is kind of what you're probably interested in. I showed you what citations were issued and what they were issued generally for, but now we're going to look at the penalty amounts for 2019 through 2024, and this will make you feel a little bit better than the over $15,000 amount that they just raised their serious injuries to. So 10 inspections resulted in citations and penalties. That does not include 2, which had a citation but 0 penalties. I'm not sure why they had the citation without the penalties. That rarely happens, but that was on the report I got from the federal OSHA website. The penalty amounts ranged from $105 to $2,940. The average amount being $724.50, and the most common amount, 6 out of 16 of the penalties were $105. A lot of times when they calculate the penalty amounts, they look at employer size. I think it's anything under 50 gets a considerable discount. They look at good faith as the employer trying to do the right thing. And the seriousness of the hazard also affects the dollar amounts. Next slide. Once you have a OSHA visit and you receive a citation packet if they found any hazards, you can request an informal conference. And I just put this in here because I think it's really important for employers to know that this is available and probably is going to result in a reduced penalty dollar amount. You'll find a file and you'll find the notice of contest in that citation packet from Minnesota OSHA compliance. And you'll have 20 days after you receive it to get that notice of contest to Minnesota OSHA. There's going to be different boxes that you can check that ask what you want to discuss during that informal conference. It is important that you probably check all of the boxes, not just even what you think you're going to discuss, but let's say in the conversation, something you think, oh, I want to talk about this. And they're like, oh, you didn't check the box. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but they're all about rules. So just check all the boxes and send it in. And then they'll schedule an informal conference with you in person or via Teams. And when I looked at the penalty amounts on the report, a lot of these are the dollar amounts that they ended up with. They started at 150 and dropped it to 105. If they were $300, they went down to 210. And if they were 450, they ended up going to 315. So I'd highly recommend you do that. Next slide. Okay. Any questions about the Minnesota OSHA compliance side? I could do a 2-hour class just on compliance visits, but I just want to give you a little bit of oversight of kind of what to expect if they show up. And so, does anybody have any questions related to that section?
I'm not currently seeing any
All right.
questions.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to the next one. Okay. So the next section, we're going to talk about an AWARE program. And this is to give you a heads up. This is not in place yet. But since veterinary services went on the special emphasis for program visits from compliance, I would say 97% sure that they are going to be added to the list in Minnesota that's going to be required to have an AWARE program. And so an AWARE program in Minnesota, AWARE stands for a Workplace Accident and Injury Reduction Program. And it's a Minnesota specific statute. I listed the statute there. And there are certain parts, and we're going to go through that certain things you're required to have in this program. And you are required to have the program if your NAICS code is listed on the AWARE program website from Minnesota OSHA Compliance. They are going to say, oh, here's the NAICS code list. You click on it, and it'll show all the NAICS codes that are required to have an AWARE program. They update it every 5 years. And so 2025, next year, that legislative session will be the year that they update that NAICS code list. And so I'm pretty sure with the high injury rate, veterinary services will be added, and it's pretty easy to do. And so you can be a little bit ahead of the game and just have that AWARE program in the back of your mind or the template filled out. And it's something that is fairly easy to put in place. Next slide. So you have to develop a written program. It must be reviewed annually. There's sticklers on that. That's the low-hanging fruit for OSHA compliance. So, and it's not like you can do it in January of 2024 and then in November of 2025. They're looking at every 12 months when they talk about annually. The first thing is you have to have, needs to be based on clearly stated goals and objectives for meeting those goals. And we will have 0 accidents, but let's say you start your AWARE program goals at the beginning of the year, January 1st, and then January 7th rolls around and somebody has an accident. Well, then you've kind of blown your whole goal for the whole year. So I always try to tell my employers, make it something else. Make it something that's attainable, but that will affect your safety and health programs. So we want to reduce our OSHA recordables by 20%, or we want to increase the number of near-miss incidents by 50%, or we want to try out some new PPE and see if we can revamp our PPE program to reduce bite wounds. Those would all be great goals for your AWARE program. Next. Element number 1 is going to be how managers, supervisors, and employees are responsible for implementing the safety and health program, and how continued participation of management will be established, measured, and maintained. That sounds like a lot, right? But there are examples on what you can use. Next slide. So examples for management could be provide resources to create a safe work environment, include discussions about safety at all meetings, carry out and enforce your safety and health programs, use PPE where necessary, make sure that your management people are following the same rules that you expect your employees to follow, and delegate responsibility for safety to a frontline personnel and annually review their progress in this area. Next. Also, we have to put, okay, what are we going to expect of our employees? And so one of the examples we can put is observe and comply with all workplace safety and health programs, request assistance when sure about how to prevent perform any task safely, report all unsafe acts or conditions, actively participate in safety activities, and report ideas for improving safety. Next. Element 2, the methods used to identify, analyze, and control new or existing hazards, conditions, and operations. Well, that sounds technical, but actually, next slide. It's pretty easy. All you have to do is do some regular walk-around inspections and look for safety hazards. You could employ a third party or your insurance company to come in, take a look around. You could do job hazard analysis for each title within your organization, or you could also call me, and I work for Workplace Safety Consultation, and this is what we do. I'll get into that a little bit down the road here, but we help employers identify hazards within their workplace. Next. How the plan will be communicated to all affected employees so they are informed of work-related hazards and controls. Next. You can do training with employees. You can hang up posters. You can include stuff in an employee handbook. You can use handouts, safety promotional activities, and some companies do huddles, whether it be daily or weekly, and so you can talk about hazards and what's been reported, accidents, how they can be prevented. That's a good time to do that. How workplace accidents will be investigated and corrective action implemented is element number 4. Next. With an accident investigation, we all have to fill out our first report of injury and submit that to work comp. But we also want to be able to take a look at that accident and not worry about the work comp side of it, but worry about the objective being to identify the hazard, the root cause, and develop and implement a corrective action. So investigate all accidents, all near misses, potential hazards, just to make sure that you know why it happened and it won't happen again. And the nice thing about having an increase in the number of near miss incidents reported is that if you investigate those, that can eliminate a hazard before an accident even happens. Timeliness is important when you're investigating an accident because people tend to forget, and make sure that the person's supervisor is involved in the accident investigation so that they can make sure that they can do whatever they need to prevent it from happening again. Next. And then how safe work practices and rules will be enforced. Next. You know, it's just that responsibility applies to all levels of an organization. So everybody should be following the rules. Make sure that the employees know what their expectations are, that you have safety policies and procedures. They need to be defined and accessible to all employees, and you need to be fair and consistent. Next. Like I said before, the program needs to be reviewed annually, every 12 months. You don't have to change anything in it if you don't want to. You can just date stamp it or add your initials to it or do whatever just to prove that you did review the program. Next. Safety committee requirements. Right now, any company that has more than 25 employees must have a safety committee. And it is outlined in state statute what they have to do. There's probably not a whole lot of vet clinics, that have that many employees, but I'm not sure what the percentage are, but some will need to comply with that and some won't. But if you are required to have an AWARE program when they update the NAICS code list, any company with 25 employees or less and required to have an AWARE program then is required to also have a safety committee. So right now you're not on the NAICS code. So if you have more than 25 employees, you must have a safety committee. If Vet Services is added to that aware list, then any company with less 25 employees or less, they are also going to be required to have that safety committee. Next. Okay. So we're on to this quick section. And we can wait for all questions till the end if you want, but does anybody have any questions?
A reminder, if you do have any questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat box or into the Q&A section, either place. Okay, got one already.
All right.
So with the AWARE program, they're asking if us, MVMA, will provide some templates, but I believe you guys actually have some. Is that correct or not?
Yep. If you go, actually, Minnesota OSHA Compliance has a whole page on AWARE. And so if you Google, which has now become our best friend, if you Google MNOSHA AWARE, AWAIR, you will get a link to the AWARE page, and there is a template on there that you can use for your AWARE program.
And Michelle, it was that on the list of resources you gave me?
I am not sure, but let's
Okay.
see. It might be on one of the slides at the beginning. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I can also provide that document to you, Nicole, and then you could just
I will
use
share it
that
with everybody
attachment
in
and share it with
attendance. Yep.
everybody. I'll just make a note of that.
Yeah. I remember glancing at the list, but I don't recall everything that was on it.
Yeah, I don't have it
So,
printed in front of me, so bad me. All right, good question. Anything else?
not at this time.
Okay, next slide. So now we get to the point where I get to talk about what I do. So I am a safety consultant principal with Minnesota OSHA Workplace Safety Consultation. I have been working in this position since 2009. And so we work with employers that request that we come in. It is a free and voluntary service. Nobody's telling you you have to do it, and nobody's going to charge you anything for it. You are the one that has to request a consultation. I do have my email address at the end of the presentation, and you all should have got the PDF of the presentation. So if you look at that last slide, it might be on the first one too. You can shoot me an email and say, hey, Michelle, I was at this presentation and we want you to come and visit our site. And I will set that up with you, and that's what we'll do. We help employers to become OSHA compliant through hazard identification. So we do the walkthroughs just like OSHA compliance would do. And then we also look at your programs to make sure that everything looks up to snuff. We have safety and health consultants available. And so they can do a safety one where you look at the physical hazards, or we also employ industrial hygienists that will come out and do look at health things. So formalin, I know, is a big one for veterinary services, and they can do that initial testing to see if there's any overexposures. And all that testing that the IH does is also free. And then we provide a report, and all of our work that we do is kept confidential, whereas OSHA compliance, you can go on the federal OSHA webpage and you can look up and see who has had a OSHA compliance visit if it's been entered in the system. So maybe not the last couple weeks, but you can see for the last 5 years who's had a compliance visit, what their penalties were, what was cited. But with our stuff, only the employer can request a copy of the report. Even OSHA compliance doesn't know we're there, and that's part of a federal standard. That's a law requiring that we keep all of our services confidential. Okay, next slide. So the benefits for working with us is we don't issue any fines or penalties. We help you create a safer workplace. We can provide compliance assistance. We all go through the same training as OSHA compliance does, and so we're trained as well as they are. Sometimes, in these days, anybody can say they're a consultant, right? They don't really have to have a degree or a certificate to do that. And sometimes we find that people are giving misinformation about safety and health. And so for us, we feel we give the best advice. We also offer free templates and training. We can come back and help you write your program if you don't have time to do it and you just want to take a time to sit down and do it with a consultant. We will do that with you. And then one of the nice things is that while you're working with consultation, you're exempt from a program visit you're exempt from a program visit from OSHA compliance while you're under consultation. So when I schedule a visit with somebody, I send out an email that has a letter attached. It's called the confirmation letter, and it lists the time and date of when our consultation will be. And then in there, it tells you that 10 working days before my visit, up until the last hazard correction date that we decide on from my visit, you are exempt from having Minnesota OSHA come in and do that program visit. So what that means is if 5 days before I'm supposed to be there, OSHA compliance comes knocking on your door, you show them that letter and you say, is this a program visit? Because Michelle's going to be here in 5 days, and then they will go away. Or if they show up 5 days after I've been there because they have no idea where I'm going, you can show them that letter and say, Michelle was just here and we're under consultation. Is this a program visit? And if they say yes, then they'll go away. So that's kind of a nice, besides not having any fines or penalties, that exemption is also nice. Next slide. So your responsibilities as an employer is you need to correct all the serious hazards we identified during the consultation by agreed upon hazard correction date. And for me, when I'm working with employers, those number of days, the least amount of days I'll give an employer is 30 days, and the most I'll go to is 75. If you're a small practice and you're all really busy and you have to write a safety and health program, I'll probably give you 75 days to do it. If you just have a knockout missing on an electrical box and it's something that you can get somebody in right away to do, I'll probably give you 30 days to do that. The days we start counting those are the day that I visit your facility. So you will not receive your report probably for 2 weeks after my visit. And that will outline everything in there as far as what hazards we identified, when they have to be corrected by, how to enter the hazard correction date. That all will come to you 2 weeks after my visit approximately. But the days we count to fix things start on the day of the visit. Then in that report at the end, there's also a list of all the hazards we found at your work site. And if there's anything serious on there, we ask that you just post it so employees can see it. I think it's good that employees know you're interested enough in their safety and health to ask us to come in. And also it can be an educational tool. They'll look at that list and go, oh, well, we have that over here. We should fix that too. So I think that that's a good thing to do, to post the list. The only time we ever would talk to OSHA compliance is if you refuse to abate something. And I don't know that that's ever happened in the, let's see, how many years have we been up and running? I don't know, 40, 25, 30. I know a lot more than I've been working there, but we've never had that issue. So that would be the only time we would get compliance involved. Next slide. So with how we work is you request a visit, I contact you, we schedule a consultation, And then the visit's very similar to an OSHA compliance visit. We have an opening conference where we sit down, I introduce myself, I tell you exactly what to expect, and then we usually do a walkthrough at that time. And then after the walkthrough, I'll say, oh, can I look at your programs? If you're required to have a log, I'll look through that with you, just make sure we're doing that correctly. And then we'll have a closing conference. And during that time, I will tell you exactly what's going to show up on the report, how to fix it, and then how many days you'll need to fix it. Next. After the visit, what you need to do is work to fix those serious hazards. We recommend fixing other than serious hazards because there may be a dollar amount involved when OSHA compliance shows up, but we do not require it. So the only thing you need to fix, I don't foresee any imminent dangers at a vet clinic, but those would need to be fixed immediately. But serious hazards, start fixing those. And then you enter the hazard correction date on or before the hazard correction date. That's super important. That makes sure that you're in compliance on your end of the deal to work with consultation. So entering that on time is important. If you need an extension, let's say you needed to order a part for something and it was on back order and it's going to be in 20 days after your hazard correction date, I can give you an extension after we talk about it. So don't ever go into total panic mode. And then like I said, you have to receive your report in 20 days. That's the standard, but usually it's a couple weeks. Next slide. We also, at Workplace Safety Consultation, manage a safety grant. We have a safety grant specialist that works in our department, and they go through grant applications and can offer a matching grant up to $10,000. You can't apply for that retroactively. So if you just bought some lift tables, you can't do that. But if you apply for it before and then it goes through the whole process, gets a signature from the commissioner, and they say go buy it, then go ahead and go buy it. You do have to have a safety survey with recommendations. When I do my visit, I can write those recommendations in your report, and then you can just submit that for your safety grant. You can have a safety committee go through and do a hazard analysis. Sometimes loss control people for an insurance company will do it for you or help you with that. You might not receive the full amount. Pre-COVID, we had a lot more money floating around for these grants, but we don't have quite as much now. They are reviewed every 2 months, so they're on a cycle starting, let's see, they did one February 15th, so April 15th will be the next cycle. It's on our website, so if you put WSC Safety Grant Program, it'll bring up that page, and you can fill it out electronically. If you do not receive a grant on the cycle that you submit it to, you can reapply the next cycle. And so the money is kind of iffy and up and down. It depends on how many people we get to apply for the grants. Sometimes there'll be 50 people, sometimes there'll be 20. So don't give up on it if you don't get it. And if you don't get the full amount, don't feel bad either, because that's kind of how the way things are going. We try to help as many employers as possible, and we try to give them as much money as we can. Next slide. Some things that are in your favor as far as the safety grant goes is you are on that inspection emphasis, so that gives you points when they score the grant application, and most of you are small employers, and you can purchase anything that would be safety related. So lifts, specialty tables, PPE, ultrasonic scalers, any type of safety training that you want to do with your employees. Those are all things that can fall under that safety grant. Next. All right. Do we have any questions on that?
We actually have a question going back to the AWARE program.
Sure.
Could you remind us what's the date that we need to check for vets being responsible for the AWARE program in 2025?
It will, I don't know for sure because it'll be during the legislative session. So I don't have a specific date. One of the things that I would recommend that you do is on the, you can Google Safety Lines, Minnesota OSHA, and that's a quarterly newsletter that Minnesota OSHA puts out. It'll just show up in your mailbox, email box. And in that newsletter, they will have all the updates because there'll be a grace period from when the legislature adapts that new list to when it goes into full force. So I would apply for, or I would sign up to receive that newsletter and just glance over it every quarter just to see if there's anything that falls under what you would be interested in, and then look for that NAICS code update.
So that's this current Minnesota legislative session, correct?
Nope, 2025.
Yep. Oh, not till next year. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So we
Beginning
still
of
have
the year.
another.
Beginning of the year.
Another. Okay.
I'm just giving you a good heads up.
Yep. Okay. Great. And a lot of times you keep referencing that you'll give so many days notification to fix any
Sure.
hazard that you say. And when you say 30 days, is that 30 calendar days or 30 business days?
30 calendar days.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Sure. There's my email address.
So do we have any other questions for Michelle at this time? She did share with me a copy of the slides, and so I will, not tonight because I don't get the report from WebEx. Sometimes it's not for 2 hours, and my bedtime's like in an hour. So I get up
too.
at
Don't
5.
feel bad.
So tomorrow I will send you a link to the evaluation. So please make any comments. I believe Michelle has a ton more information she could share with us if you're interested in that. Michelle, is that correct?
Oh, I have so much more information I can share with you guys. I can share stuff on safety committees and all the specific programs and yeah. So if we
So
want
if
to
you're,
more.
yeah. So if you're interested in learning more, we can have Michelle come back. But I do have a copy of her slides, so I will share those with you also tomorrow. She does have a list of resources. We will make sure we've got that completely up to date before we send that to you. And I believe that's all there was. Michelle, do you have anything else you'd like to share with the audience this evening?
No, nothing. Like I said, if you have any specific questions and you didn't want to ask them in the chat or whatever, shoot me an email. That's the best way to get a hold of me, and I will get back to you.
Great. And I will share her email information also with you guys in case you can't find it or you can't open the PDF that I send as an attachment. I'm
Great.
not seeing any other questions this evening. So, Michelle, I'd like to thank you very much for your time this evening and thank everybody who joined us online for this wonderful information. Thank you guys so much and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.